So there's a story, Kirsty, from your sister Wendy, who lives alternately in Turkey and India. I think we should settle back for this because this is a good long story. So, does that sound right? No,
yeah, she's very wordy.
Yeah, okay,
She's
right.
in her PhD.
Yeah, okay, well, here we go. Once upon a time, there were 3 sisters and a brother. This story concerns the 2 elder sisters, and as is the nature of children, the greater the difference in age, the more inconsequential they seem to be. They seem to the intense egoism of the juvenile self. Such egotists are children that I'm not sure that one's stories from childhood can ever be stories about anyone but oneself. Thus, it is that I find that this story is only tangentially about the second oldest sister, and mostly an example of how she suffered as a consequence of this position. That's the opening paragraph.
I did not get through the first page of her PhD. Good enough.
Anyway, says Wendy, the eldest was me and I'm called Wendy, and the second oldest, the victim, the subject of this tale, was called Kirsten. Yes, that is her proper name, and a much prettier name I think it is too, but there ain't no accounting for tastes. And as it's my story, I shall call her Kirsten. Ain't I the vexing one? Kirsty.
Always have been, Wendy.
Yep. I can see that. I've never met her, but I've read the story 3 months already, and I can see what you're saying. What you mean.
I've never heard of a bossy older sister.
This story in a nutshell, then, is a story of what some would call a correcting justice, but some would feel to be a crime. Whichever way you look at it, Kirsten was its victim. However, it actually tells you nothing about her except in as much as it tells you that she was wronged. Thankfully, though, it is about the wrong she suffered but did not know she was suffering. As such, it is typical of how, during our childhood, I used my cunning seniority to enact my agenda of desire, to call the shots and manipulate events to serve myself. Shaming for me then, although I have to admit that, though I did then feel a sort of a shame at the transgression I committed, there was a sense of righteousness at justice being done, of the righting of a terrible mistake.
You're following along.
We haven't got to the story yet. It is a story I have recounted a few times to my family, and so to those of you who have heard it before, my apologies if I bore you at all. It is in writing for the first time, however, and therefore bound to have details lacking in the nutshell editions dropped into the flow of general family exchanges of memories. It is, or should be, the stuff of family lore, but such things can and do get abbreviated or reduced to the kind of fact-like figure with overuse. Is this, I wonder, the status of this story? Question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. It happened, so the story begins. It happened in middle-income suburban Melbourne when Wendy was about 8 and Kirsten was 6 and a half. In the months before Christmas, when children since the late 19th century in the Christian so-called West construct lists of all the things they need Father Christmas to bring them. So this story occurred in Australia, in the very distant West, in Mitcham, Melbourne, in perhaps the Christmas of 1967. Both Wendy and Kirsten had constructed and reconstructed their lists along with ingratiating letters to Father Christmas, asking after the doings and welfare of the elves or reindeer and kindly requesting, or more honestly, begging, the very magic person who is Father Christmas for this and this and this and this and this and this and, oh yes, if at all possible, this and this. Signed, your best friend and loyalist fan, so-and-so. The letter which, in other words, has to accompany such lists. Wendy had stressed in the Christmas list of 67 and also in at least her 3 prior lists, comprising her last 2 birthdays and the previous Christmas, that what she most needed was a teary-deary doll. Most certainly, and as we are taught to say indubitably, a teary-deary doll was, in the Christmas of 67, top of the list, or pops, or as we say now, numero bleeding uno. Wendy has now almost no recall of what Kirsten had on her list, although she not she not only most probably acted as the prime source of consultation or suggestion giver to Kirsten's list. When children give suggestions to other children, there cannot help but be elements of self-interest vested in them. It may be that I advised Kirsten to ask for a Teary Deary doll as well. But somehow I think I probably didn't, because Teary Deary needed to be the Teary Deary doll, and so uniquely mine. I think I remember suggesting that Kirsten would really enjoy a necklace and bracelet making set of many coloured and sized beads, which I would of course be available to help her play with, suggesting she copy my dazzling designs and ideas. It may be, however, that this is a false memory, since the glass bead set figures later in this tale of crime and sort of shame. Anyway, we had constructed our lists and had set them, and then waited and waited and waited, and finally Christmas Eve came, and we hung our pillowcases on the posts at the end of our beds, and eventually got to sleep. Early the next morning I was awake, with the first crack of the sky of a golden summer Christmas morning light. Kirsten was not yet awake. I raced around to my nicely bulging pillowcase at the end of my bed and opened it. I saw at once that the Teary Deary doll was not at the top, and a quick scan of items below told me she was not there either. But I, of course, made absolutely sure and quickly routed around. I found I had a multi-sized and coloured glass bead set, but this could not interest me at the time. I panicked, but I kept my head and soon realised that the next thing to do was to check Kirsten's sack. Was this a premonition of the event to come? And very lucky I did too, and before Kirsten awoke, because there inside her pillowcase I beheld my own Teary Deary doll. So of course I took her. She was really mine. There had been an awful cock-up by Father Christmas. He had got our needs confused and had given Teary Deary to Kirsten. Thus it happened that once upon a time and once long ago, I swapped the Teary Deary doll for that nice but not compelling glass bead set. It was a case of swapping, of simple exchange, but most particularly it was a correcting of the muddle-headedness of the otherwise quite marvellous Father Christmas. But it was also, I knew in my heart of hearts, a theft. And I knew myself for the first time as a thief. And I knew my sister as my victim, poor Kirsten. How she suffered wittingly, and also, as we have just heard, unwittingly, from my deceptions and despotism. But since she wasn't ever any the wiser until I told her many years later, I can comfort myself now that it never had a negative effect, as some of the other meaner acts of domination, oppression and persecution I used. Still, and it has to be said that I did make the obvious choice for teacher in our mock classrooms. Yet, truly my sister, if I was not always easy to counter and deal with, we still had some jolly good games and spent some real quality time together with our dollies. But what went on with the dollies sometimes is, I realise, another badly reflecting upon self-story. A tale of my witting and spiteful persecution of you. But that, as they say, is another story. It's all coming back to destinations.
Now, Father Christmas was rather muddle-headed in those days, and the lists, as you heard about, one day when he came to drop the presents, obviously he needed lists so he knew what to leave. He actually left the actual original list, the idiot. Dear Santa Claus, I'm writing this letter because this isn't really exactly very close. I'm writing this letter because I want you to choose what you think would be best. And then she goes on 8 things, and down the bottom, I hope you don't get stuck in any chimneys. Lots of love from Kirsty. And we have all 8 presents are illustrated, just in case you couldn't read.
What year is that tape?
No, Bill is right.
Oh.